We need to start with a little honesty. We're among friends. How many of you have buttons or menu items on your radio that you have no idea what they actually do? Come on, most of you do. Tonight, we're going to look at something that has a lot to do with those mysterious settings and which is how our brains respond to sound. By the end of tonight, I think you'll see that many of those features and functions aren't just there to make your radio fancier or more complicated. They're designed to help you hear better and to make you be heard better by other people. Let me go back. I pushed the wrong button. Anyway, off to a great start. We're talking about sound, which begins, I think most of us know, as a physical vibration. But what we experience depends on how our brains perceive it. Sound is something more than something you hear. It can influence how you think, how you feel, and what you physically sense. Simple sounds like ocean waves, a cat purring, or a baby's laugh. They all generate emotional responses in us. They make us feel happy. Other sounds bring strong negative reactions. Who doesn't hate this sound? Nails on a chalkboard. Or, sorry, Martin, a dentist drill. That same baby whose laugh made us smile can instantly put us on alert when there's a single cry. We also alert to other sounds like smoke alarms. Now, sounds can trigger powerful memories, like the song that played at your wedding. Advertisers make great use of sound. When a familiar sound becomes linked to a brand, it creates a strong mental image. Those relaxing ocean waves that I played for you twice that we just heard are closely associated with what? Corona beer commercials. And of course, the sound and music have turned many sporting events into um, lasting cultural traditions. You don't just recognize the Monday Night Football theme, you instantly connected with memories of great games and time spent with friends and family. There are scientific fields that study how sound waves become the sounds that we hear and understand. Acoustics focuses on the physical side of sound, how sound waves are created, how they travel through the air or other materials, and how they interact with the world around us. Psychoacoustics explores how we perceive sound and how it influences your thoughts, your feelings, and even your physical reactions. And even though a sound can be measured precisely, different people may hear and interpret it differently based on their experience, their memories, and their expectations. So, what is sound? It's basically vibrating air. And what we're going to concentrate on tonight is a chain, starting with a sound vibration in the air, how our ears handle that vibration, and finally, how the brain interprets that vibration. This is what allows us to recognize the vibration as a meaningful event, like the pop of a balloon or the melody of a song. Now, as hams, we know that frequency is measured in what? Hertz, right? The higher the frequency, the higher the pitch. For instance, this is a 100 hertz tone, and this is 1,000 hertz. And cover your ears, this is 5,000 hertz. So let's take a little tour of how our ears work. The outer ear catches the sound waves from the air and channels it down the ear canal, and those sound waves hit the eardrum, causing it to vibrate. And then the vibrating eardrum sets three tiny bones in the middle ear into action. You remember from biology in high school, the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup? These bones amplify the vibrations and pass them into the spiral-shaped inner ear, which is called the cochlea. Now, inside the cochlea, the vibrations create waves in a fluid that bend thousands of microscopic hair cells. As these cells bend, they convert the vibrations into electrical signals. And those signals will travel along the auditory nerve to the brain where they're recognized as sound. Now, for a young, healthy person, the range of hearing is about 20 hertz on the low end to 20,000 hertz on the high end. But hearing isn't the same for everybody. It's highly individual. In fact, no people hear exactly the same way. Age is probably the biggest factor. Babies, you may not have known this, but babies can hear frequencies slightly above 20,000 hertz, but that ability gradually declines over time. By adulthood, most people can only hear up to about 15 or 17,000 hertz, and that upper limit will even drop further as we age. And of course, hearing can be damaged by years of exposure to loud noise. Now, I spent my career with a lot of radio people who loved their loud, closed ear headphones. And that's one of the reasons why I know quite a few retired, nearly deaf DJs today. Now, the sounds below 20 hertz are called infrasound. The sounds above 20,000 hertz are known as ultrasound. Have you ever wondered why your dog hears things that you don't? The dog's hearing extends well beyond ours on both ends of the range, from 40 hertz to more than 60,000 hertz. And that's also why you can't hear a dog whistle. Most dog whistles produce sounds between 23,000 and 54,000 hertz, which is well above the range of human hearing. Now, our hearing is most sensitive in the mid frequency range between about 2 and 5,000 hertz. In this range, we can detect extremely faint sounds close to 0 decibels, but at much lower and much higher frequencies, the sound has to be considerably louder before we perceive it as being equally loud. Now, this isn't coincidence. The frequencies where our hearing is most sensitive overlap with the sounds that matter most for communication and survival. Most of the consonants that make speech clear and understandable fall in the 4 to 5,000 hertz range. If you lose hearing here, conversations can sound muffled even though you still hear the lower pitched vowel sounds. The same frequency is also common in warning sounds, like a baby cry, a scream, or a shout. Most of the energy is here. These sounds grab our attention almost instantly. We don't even stop to analyze them. Our brains are wired to give these sort of sounds priority because we're not passive listeners. We're biologically tuned to recognize the sounds that help us understand one another and to react quickly when something might be wrong. We don't, while we don't hear frequencies below 20 hertz, we sometimes will feel them as vibrations throughout our body. Our ears and brain do not process these infrasound waves as recognizable pitch or tone, but at a high enough sound level, the physical energy of the low frequency waves can move the body and create a sensation of vibration. Now, there's a difference between hearing a sound and sensing its effects. That helps explain why low frequency noise can be so unsettling. Now, we encounter low frequency noises every day from a lot of common sources like cars and trucks and aircraft and compressors and HVAC systems. Research has shown that long term exposure to low frequency noise can be associated with increased annoyance, stress, sleep disturbance, and difficulty concentrating. Some people also report physical sensations such as dizziness and headaches and fatigue and pressure in the head or ear. Now, similar complaints are often reported by people who are living near wind farms and more recently in the news, AI data centers. Scientists continue to debate the reason behind these experiences. Some researchers argue that the symptoms are driven primarily because of the annoyance and concerns about the source of the noise. In other words, you hate AI data centers, so they make you sick. Others suggest, though, that the low frequency sound and infrasound may have direct effects on the body and possible negative impacts on the inner ear. Now, low frequency noise and infrasound from sources such as an AI data center or a wind turbine are not specifically addressed in most community noise regulations. Many communities, including Ventura, Oxnard, and Seavey Valley, rely on something called A weighted decibel measurements, or dBA. And they use that to enforce their noise limits. These measurements are designed to approximate human hearing by emphasizing the frequencies that we hear best and reducing the contribution of the very low frequency sounds. So consider this sound of a wind turbine. Now, it's certainly not nice if you're living next door to it, but at a quarter of a mile away, this sound might only measure around 40 dBA, which is roughly comparable to the sound of a refrigerator. But that measurement did not capture the infrasound, the very low frequencies below 20 hertz. These frequencies travel further, and the higher pitched sounds can actually pass through buildings much more easily. Communities that don't rely on decibel measurements face a similar problem. Here in Thousand Oaks and in unincorporated Ventura County, they base their standards on largely whether the sound is clearly audible to a person at a distance of 50 feet, especially at night. And because infrasound falls below the threshold of hearing, it would not be detected under these standards either. Now, one infrasonic frequency that's received a lot of attention, especially in movie sound design, is 19 hertz. Has anybody heard about this? You may have heard the claim that 19 hertz is close to the resonant frequency of the human eyeball, and that a powerful 19 hertz sound wave can make your eyes vibrate and cause blurry visions and even strange, kind of ghostly sensations. While this idea has kind of become part of popular culture, the scientific evidence for this is pretty limited. But what we do know is that strong low frequency sound can affect the way we feel. Infrasound can create physical sensations, and our brains have to constantly interpret those signals. When something feels unusual or unexplained, our brain's threat detection system responds with feelings of unease, anxiety, or even the unsettling sense that there might be a ghostly presence nearby. This might help explain why infrasound has become a useful tool in horror films. It can create tension and a feeling of dread, making an audience feel as though something is wrong and that they're not alone when they can't even really identify what the source of the feeling is. The lowest part of the audio spectrum, from about 20 to 250 hertz, plays a powerful role in how we experience sound. These low frequencies can create very different feelings. They can give us a sense of grounding and stability, but they can also create the feelings of tension and dread. Now, in music, these frequencies provide the rhythmic and harmonic foundations of a piece. The deep sounds of bass guitars and cellos and the low registers of a piano give music the sense of power and depth and substance. For example, the lowest C string on a cello vibrates, you can write this down, at 65.4 hertz. You can hear this deep resonance rather in Bach's cello suites, where the cellist uses the lowest, thickest string to create a warm, rich tone. You didn't catch that the cellist was moving down the scale from a higher C to a lower C, and then finally to the open low C string. These frequencies are not just heard, they can, and Keith can testify, they're felt as physical vibrations in your body. That physical sensation adds to a feeling of presence and connection that makes music a powerful experience. Sound designers use low frequency tones to create a sense of unease, tension, and dread. This iconic sound of the shark in Jaws isn't a roar or a growl, just two pulsating notes. They start slowly and grow fast. It creates a sense of dread, ominous approach of danger. You feel that something is fundamentally wrong, often long before any visual threat appears. And this is interesting, you still remember your emotional reaction to those two tones, even 51 years after that movie was made. Low frequency rumbles have also been linked to big, powerful, and dangerous natural events like earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, avalanches, ACS events, thunder, or the approach of a large threatening animal, like the T Rex from the movie Jurassic Park. Should be more areas. The sound becomes a primal warning signal of impending danger and taps into our instinctual fear response. The mid range of the audible spectrum from about 250 to 5,000 hertz is the most important range for human communication and perception. This is the range where we find the fundamental frequencies of human speech. It is also where our hearing is the most sensitive, especially between 2,000 and 5,000 hertz. The importance of this range becomes especially clear when we look at hearing loss. Now, I know there's some folks here like me that wear hearing aids. Now, it's possible to have, if you're wearing hearing aids and you've had hearing loss, it's possible to have relatively normal hearing at the lower and higher frequencies, but still struggle with speech if the hearing loss affects this critical mid range. That's because understanding speech depends heavily on hearing the higher frequency consonant sounds such as S, F, T, and K. But these consonants carry much of the information that makes words understandable, but they also contain less acoustic energy than the louder, lower frequency vowel sounds. So someone with a mid-range hearing loss might hear that somebody is talking, but the words sound unclear and muffled or distorted. So that's why a hearing test will focus so heavily on this important range. Typically, when you're tested, they measure from about 250 hertz to 8,000 hertz. Now, on this chart, this area in blue, you can kind of see it in blue, that is the typical speech hearing range. Now, for instance, like me, I have normal hearing about here until I get to 1,000 hertz, and then it drops off, and I miss those K, S, F, and T, K area, and that way I have probably problems without hearing aids of distinguishing speech, certain speech, or something like bird sounds. So that's an example of how all that works. You can see where other types of sounds kind of fit in on that chart. Context is one of the core principles of psychoacoustics. A tone by itself is simply a physical vibration, a frequency. But what we experience as sound is shaped by our brains. Our brains interpret these vibrations through learned association, memories, and context. Take middle C on a piano. It's approximately the middle note on a standard piano keyboard with a frequency of about 523 hertz. Any instrument capable of playing in this range, a string, a woodwind, a brass instrument, can produce that same pitch. A pure 523 hertz sine wave is sometimes used as a reference tone for tuning middle C. But when middle C is played on a piano, we don't just hear the single frequency. We hear the fundamental tone combined with a unique pattern of harmonic overtones that are created by the instrument itself. Our brains interpret that combination as rich and a familiar, pleasant sound. Now consider that same frequency coming from a smoke alarm. The frequency is nearly identical, but the sound is completely different. The alarm's harsh tones are designed to grab our attention and trigger an immediate response. The vibration is the same. What changed was the context, the sound's characteristics, and the way our brains interpret it. When we talk about higher frequencies, we mean the sounds above 5,000 hertz, extending up to the upper limit of human hearing. Most of us know that bats use high frequency sounds for echolocation. They send out their calls and listen for the echoes bouncing back from objects around them, allowing them to navigate and hunt in the dark. Echolocation calls typically range from about 20 to 100 kilohertz, far above the range of human hearing. Some bats go even higher. The calls of this guy here, he's the Percival's trident bat, have been measured at an astounding 212 kilohertz. Now, for this tiny 4-gram bat, these extreme frequencies give it a major advantage. Many insects cannot hear the sounds that high, so they may never know when this predator is coming. Frequencies above 5,000 hertz play an important role in natural alert signals. These high pitched sounds are especially effective in cutting through the background noise and grabbing our attention. That's why many warning devices, such as fire alarms and ambulance sirens, use frequencies in this range. Sound designers in horror films take advantage of the same response. A classic example is the famous shower scene from Psycho. I won't play too much of that. It's pretty gruesome. The sharp screeching violin notes immediately create a sense of tension and fear. Our brains are forced to process both the action on the screen and the intrusive high-pitched sounds, keeping us in a very heightened state of alertness. This heightened state makes us more sensitive to the next thing they pull on us. So when the next scare arrives, we're already primed and ready to react. By using high-pitched and dissonant sounds, filmmakers are triggering our instinctive emotional responses. The emotional power of music is closely tied to the relationship between consonance and dissonance. The way we perceive combinations of musical notes is either pleasant and stable or tense and unresolved. Our response is rooted in both the physical properties of sound waves and the way our brains interpret them. One important factor is the mathematical relationship between the frequencies of the notes being played. Consonant intervals are the combinations that we hear as smooth and pleasing are typically built on whole number frequency ratios. For example, an octave has a ratio of 2 to 1, meaning the higher note vibrates at exactly twice the frequency of the lower note. Another example is the perfect fifth, such as C to G, which has a frequency of 3 to 2. Let's return to our favorite song, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. The interval between the first twinkle in C and the second twinkle in G is a perfect fifth. Because the frequencies line up in that simple 3 to 2 relationship, the two notes blend smoothly together, creating a stable and pleasant sound. Excuse me. In contrast, dissonant intervals are built on more complex frequency relationships, which our brains often perceive as tense and stable and unresolved. One of the most dissonant intervals is the minor second, for example, C to C sharp, which has a frequency ratio of about 16 to 15. But the most famous example is the tritone, such as C to F sharp. It has a complex ratio of about 45 to 32 and creates a strong sense of tension. Because of this unsettling quality, the tritone became known in Latin as Diabolus in Musica, or the devil in music. During the Middle Ages, composers followed strict musical rules and generally favored the intervals that sounded stable and harmonious. The tritone, they couldn't sing it. It didn't fit into the orderly structure of the forms of music they were writing, such as Gregorian chants. The association between the tritone and evil and Satanism came much later. It was revived in popular culture during the 20th century and was especially reinforced in the 1970s by heavy metal bands such as Black Sabbath. So why do these intervals sound so different? When the notes with the complex frequency ratios are played together, their harmonic overtones interact at ways that create interference. The ear perceives this as sensation as beating or roughness. That physical roughness is interpreted by our brains as tension, making the dissonant sounds feel jarring and unstable and in need of resolution. Now, our brains produce several patterns of electrical activity called brain waves, which are associated with different states of consciousness. Now, the brain waves are not separate modes that turn on and off. They're all always present in our brains, but the relative strength changes depending on what we're doing and how we feel. Delta waves are the slowest brain waves. They dominate during deep, dreamless sleep, and are associated with the body's restorative process. Theta waves appear during drowsiness, light sleep, and REM sleep, and deep meditation. They've been linked with creativity, intuition, and memory. Alpha waves occur during calm, relaxed wakefulness, such as daydreaming, meditation, or being in the flow, and they're associated with kind of a relaxed but alert state of mind. Beta waves are the brain's primary waking pattern. They support active thinking, problem solving, focus, and attention. And the gamma waves are the brain's fastest waves. They're involved in intense focus, complex information processing, and the brain's ability to combine sights, sounds, and sensation into one unified experience. So, could there be a therapeutic benefit if we could encourage our brains to produce these different brainwave states? One technique that attempts to do this is an auditory illusion called the binaural beat. The effect is created by playing two pure tones of slightly different frequencies, one in the left ear and the other in the right, usually through headphones. For example, if a 400 hertz tone is played in your left ear and a 410 hertz tone is played in your right ear, your brain does not hear two separate tones. Instead, it perceives a single tone that seems to pulse or beat at the difference between the two frequencies. So in this case, it's 10 hertz. The perceived beat occurs at a 10 hertz rate. This auditory illusion is called the binaural beat. Now, binaural beats have been promoted as a way to improve relaxation, focus, sleep, and other aspects of mental performance. The idea is based on a concept called brainwave entrainment. The theory suggests that the brain may naturally synchronize some of its electrical activity to the rhythm of an external stimulus. So let's return to our example. If your brain perceives a 10 hertz binaural beat, could it be encouraged to shift some of its activity towards 10 hertz? If you'll remember, 10 hertz falls in the middle of that alpha brainwave area, which was associated with wakefulness and creativity and the sense of being in the flow. So it's an intriguing idea, but there literally has been decades of research on this, and the scientific evidence remains mixed. Some studies report modest benefits under certain conditions, while others find little or no effect. So far, researchers have found no reliable way to use binaural beats to consistently shift the brain into specific brainwave states, but that hasn't stopped them from trying. Delta wave beats from 1 to 4 hertz are marketed heavily to promote deep sleep and help with insomnia. Theta beats around 6 hertz have shown some promise for relaxation and meditation. However, other studies have found participants actually became more alert instead. Alpha beats from 8 to 13 hertz are commonly promoted for stress reduction and creativity. And while some studies have reported modest improvements in certain tasks, others have found little or no benefits. And beta beats at 14 to 30 hertz, which are associated with focus and concentration. But again, research in this area has also produced just conflicting results. Now, one reason the evidence remains so inconsistent is that researchers often use different experimental methods, different listening times, and different ways of measuring the outcomes. So until the studies become more standardized, it will remain difficult to determine just how effective binaural beats are. Now, while the evidence for binaural beats remains mixed, there has been some promising research on one specific audio frequency. Researchers at Nagoya University found that a 100 hertz tone, may help reduce the symptoms of motion sickness. In controlled studies involving both mice and who knew mice could get seasick, but involving both mice and human volunteers, 1 minute of exposure to a 100 hertz tone significantly reduced common symptoms such as nausea, dizziness, and problems with balance. Motion sickness occurs when your brain receives conflicting information. Your eyes tell your brain one thing, and while your inner ear senses motion and senses it all as something different. So researchers believe the 100 hertz tone works by gently stimulating the balance organs of the inner ear. In effect, it appears to help the brain better process and reconcile the fact that it's getting conflicting signals. While this research is still in its early stages, rather, it offers an intriguing example of how a simple sound may one day get me happily on Bill Wilcox's boat. But yes, no, you think that's AI? Oh, come on. Of course it's AI. There are no living pictures of me getting seasick, so I had to go to AI. It does happen. Now, one of the most persistent urban legends about sound is something called the brown note. According to this legend, an infrasonic tone, usually said to be somewhere between 5 and 9 hertz, can cause a person to lose control of their bowels. How many of you remember the TV show Mythbusters? Oh, I love that show. To test the claim, the star Adam Savage volunteered to be a guinea pig. He put on an adult diaper. He stood in front of an array of 12 powerful subwoofers, like the kinds used at rock concerts, but they were specifically modified to produce extremely intense sounds at very low frequencies. The results were certainly dramatic. At 9 hertz, Adam described a feeling of chest anxiety as the long sound waves caused the air in his lungs to move. And at 32 hertz, played at 128 decibels, he reported his vision was unstable as the vibrations affected his eyes, leaving him severely disoriented. But despite all that abuse, there was no brown note. So, where did the story come from? One likely source is research conducted for the U.S. space program. In those studies, volunteers were exposed to intense mechanical vibrations through specially designed cockpit seats to simulate the forces experienced during a rocket launch. The vibrations produced a variety of nasty physical sensation, but they did not cause anyone to lose bowel control. There's an extraordinary set of claims surrounding the so-called solfeggio frequencies. These are specific audio tones often described as part of an ancient, sacred musical scale with unique healing powers. Each frequency is said to produce a very specific benefit. For instance, 396 hertz is claimed to liberate guilt and fear. 417 hertz supposedly facilitates change. Gird your loins. 528 hertz is promoted as the love frequency, with claims that it can even repair human DNA. And if that isn't enough, 639 hertz is said to balance relationships. So, where do these claims come from? They're based on applying New Age wellness ideas to a real principle of physics, which is resonance. If two objects share the same natural resonant frequency, one can cause the other to vibrate. That's why a piano string can make another nearby string vibrate without ever touching it. Proponents of the solfeggio frequencies extend that idea by suggesting that every cell or organ in the human body has its own ideal resonant frequency, and that illness or emotional trauma can be corrected by exposing the body to the right solfeggio tone. Now, while our cells are made of molecules that are constantly vibrating, there is no credible scientific evidence that organs such as the heart or the liver have a single resonant frequency and that they can be restored by listening to low intensity audible sound. So, in other words, the principle of resonance is real, but the therapeutic claims for solfeggio frequencies is not supported by any scientific evidence. So, what does all this have to do with amateur radio? At its heart, amateur radio is about extracting meaningful information from weak, distorted signals buried in noise. As hams, we take great pride in being able to copy signals that are barely audible. Fortunately, the human brain is an extraordinary signal processor. It can suppress unwanted sounds and focus on a single voice or tone. That's a phenomenon known as the cocktail party effect. Many of the controls on your radio are designed to make that job easier by reducing the workload on your ears and your brain. One example is filtering. Filters remove unwanted noise so you can concentrate on the one station you want to hear. Here's an example of a band filter working on 14 megahertz.
Radio November 6, and I'm something with Charlie. Radio November 6, make your phone, please. Radio November 6, Radio November 6, and Charlie into something. So do you copy, over?
CW operators use very narrow filters to isolate a single Morse code signal from a crowded band. But here's something that maybe many hams or new hams don't realize. A CW signal traveling through the air contains no sound at all. It's simply a radio carrier that's switched on and off by the key. Because our ears can't hear radio frequencies, the receiver creates an audio tone by mixing the incoming signal with an internal oscillator. The difference between these two radio frequencies becomes the musical note that you hear in your headphones. Now, does that sound familiar? It's the same basic principle we discussed with binaural beats, except here the beat is created electronically inside your radio instead of inside your brain. Your CW's pitch control changes that internal oscillator, allowing you to choose an audio note that you can hear without changing your transmit frequency. Don't tell me they're saying something nasty, okay? The radio also matches your transmitted side tone to that selected pitch. So as you tune another station until its note matches your preferred side tone, you automatically zero beat their signal, placing your transmitted signal precisely on their frequency. But even if you don't get that, ultimately pitch control is about operator comfort. Although human hearing is most sensitive in the upper mid-range, listening to a sharp 1000 hertz Morse tone for hours during a contest could be surprisingly fatiguing. That's why many CW operators choose lower, mellower tones. Around 600 hertz is a popular choice. While our ears are slightly less sensitive at that frequency, most operators find it easier to listen to that frequency for longer periods of time. And if a pileup or a background noise makes copying difficult, you can simply adjust the pitch of the frequency up so that it stands out more clearly from the interference. That's another example of psychoacoustics at work. You're not changing the radio signal, you're making it easier for your brain to recognize it. In single sideband communication, the goal isn't high fidelity audio, it's intelligibility. It's getting as many words across as possible through the noise and the fading and the static. Remember what we learned about speech. The low frequency vowel sounds carry most of the acoustic energy, but the higher frequency consonants like P, T, S, and K carry much of the meaning. If the loud vowel sounds dominate the audio, the transmitter can reach its power limit before the quieter consonants are strong enough to be heard. The result is a signal that's loud, but it's not necessarily easy to understand. That's why most modern transceivers use speech processors and audio compressors. They reduce the difference between the loudest and the quietest parts of your voice by boosting the softer consonants and controlling the louder vowels. Yeah, here's an example of speech processing in action.
This is M0MSN, M0MSN, just testing. This is M0MSN, M0MSN, just testing, 1, 2, 3.
Now, the processed audio might sound a little harsh or unnatural, but to a ham listening through static 1,000 miles away, those emphasized consonants can make the difference between missing the message or copying it perfectly. Many transceivers also use a transmit equalizer. It will remove some of the low frequencies below about 300 hertz, because those frequencies basically just take up valuable transmitter power but add very little to speech clarity. At the same time, it'll boost the signal in the 2 to 3 kilohertz range, where many of those important consonants are found. These are the sounds that help the listener's brain understand your words, especially when the signal is weak and noisy. The radio, in this case, is not trying to produce the most pleasing sound. It's producing the sound that your brain can understand most easily and under difficult conditions. A radio signal strength can change dramatically from one moment to the next, as we know. A weak DX station may be followed immediately by a strong local signal. Without automatic gain control or AGC, that strong signal could be painfully loud, especially if you're wearing headphones. AGC automatically adjusts the receiver's gain, keeping the audio at a more consistent and comfortable listening level. Some radios take this even a step further. Flex Radio uses a feature called automatic gain control threshold. Rather than continually amplifying the background noise, you can set the threshold so that the receiver only emphasizes the signals that rise above the noise floor. Many of our modern amateur radios also use digital signal processing, or DSP. Think of DSP as a lightning fast mechanical brain that continually analyzes the audio coming from your receiver. Here's what it does. It converts the incoming analog signal into a stream of digital numbers. It analyzes those numbers in real time, looking for the characteristics of speech versus noise. And then with sophisticated algorithms, it suppresses or removes much of the unwanted noise. And then finally, it converts the cleaned up digital signal back into analog audio that you can hear. Here's an example of DSP in action on 20-meter sideband.
Kilometers long, 1.5 kilometers wide. Resident population is 6 people and 2 cows. With us here, it's 8 people and 2 cows. QSL.
Now, many of us are familiar with the ICOM 7300. There's a picture up there. Its real-time spectrum scope and waterfall display are powered by that same DSP technology that is cleaning up the audio that you're hearing. So you don't need to have a state-of-the-art flex radio to apply some of the ideas that we've talked about today. How many of you have ever been told to back away from the microphone? When your mouth gets too close to a directional microphone, something called the proximity effect boosts the bass frequencies, and your voice may sound deeper, but it also becomes muddier and harder to understand. And while I've spent a lot of time talking about protecting your hearing, don't overlook the value of a pair of good headphones. Used properly, they block noise, room noise echoes, household noise, and other distractions. But more importantly, they allow your brain to concentrate on the weak signals that matter. Throughout this presentation, we've seen that sound is much more than vibrating air. It influences how we think and how we feel, and even how our bodies respond. And I think amateur radio is about much more than just radios, antennas, and electronics. At its core, it depends on the remarkable partnership between our ears and our brains. Even when signals are weak, noisy, and distorted, the human brain can recognize patterns, fill in missing information, and extract meaning. The better we understand how we hear, the better we become at communicating, and that's a skill I think every ham can appreciate. Thank you. No, I'm sure maybe it does, but I guess. Johnny? Yeah. Well, that makes sense. That's a perfect example. Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't think they'd appreciate that at the drag strip, but yes. Your eyes vibrate? Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Well, I think you're creating the binaural beat effect, and you're hearing your brain has become more attuned to the difference between those two frequencies.
Word we also know for that binaural beat, heterodyne.
Thank you.
Anybody who's got past a couple of ham exams knows that the actual word we use for that binaural beat is a heterodyne.
I don't need it. I got a mic. All right. Well, that looks like it for questions, huh? Thank you.